Now, let's talk a little bit more about clearing elements and the caveats of what happens to a parent element when the child elements are floating. Okay? And sometimes what happens can be a little perplexing until you get used to how floats and clears work. So right now, I have section 3, and we know section 3 is not behaving entirely correctly. It's getting moved around. It's sort of working like an inline element right now. Okay, so it's getting the default formatting of a p tag, but it's not officially a p tag. So let's try adding our element around, and then what we should have is this will be a true block level element, and that should force the floats to go down. So let's see what happens if we just add a p tag around our type section 3 like so, and we will save. And while we're here, let's go ahead and take our right off. So all of our boxes, all of them will float left, and we will save. And let's update our page, and we'll scroll down and take a look. All right, so now this element, section 3, our p tag, is behaving as a true block level element, and what's happening is the float elements are drawing underneath, behaving as they should. Now, let's take a look at what happens if you have a parent element. So we need to find section 3. There's section 2. I think I went blazing past it here. There's section 3. Right now, the height of our element has a default of 20 rem. Let's just add a background color. And I'll do orange red. Okay, and we'll save. So we have a default, not a default, but we have a height that is being forced on this element of 20 rem. Okay, so if we save and refresh our page, you will see that background. Okay, now if we continue to add float elements, let's do that. Let's go and we will copy. So we have, let's just do 3 more. And we'll have 14, 15, and 16 on our numbers. Let's save and refresh our page. Okay, now you'll notice this last one is hanging outside of our default. We've set this to be a certain height, and that's what that height is going to be. And these elements are just going to continue to draw, to continue to make our rows and our columns. And you probably have already figured out this would be a pretty nice way of creating a photo gallery. So I, of course, would probably figure out my margins a little bit better to be able to get these to be centered inside here, you know, that this space and this space is the same. But that would just take a, you know, a little bit of calculating on your margins. You might have to add some padding to this side of your section, but you can figure it out. Okay, so now what we're going to do is go back to our code, and on section 3, we're going to set the height to auto, because often you want the background to automatically adjust to the amount of content. So we wouldn't want to go and figure out what the height had to be for another row, another row of float elements. We would want the section, in this case, the element, to figure out its height on its own. But if we set this to auto, where it should auto calculate, which it would with relative elements, Okay, it would not work with absolute elements, and it's not going to work with our float elements either. So let's go ahead and save, and we're going to take a look and see what happens. So we're going to refresh. We'll drop down, and you will see that our background color will stay in that block level area of our P tag, but now it's no longer containing any of the float elements. And if you've noticed, look at the footer. Okay, the footer has now moved up also, which means our aside is dropping down, our footer has moved up, our div container has moved up, and all of these elements are just sort of floating, if you will, out in space. Okay, so they're still inside of this drawing, but when I say this, section 3 has no idea that these float elements are there. Okay, they're just gone. We see them, but the parent element holding them has no clue they're there. So we need to fix this. And the old school way is people used to add an element, maybe an empty div tag after the last float, and then they would apply their clears to that empty tag. But that's not semantically correct. You don't want to introduce tags that do nothing. Okay, so there's a better way to fix this. So what I'm going to do is scroll all the way down to the bottom of my CSS, and we're going to create what is called a clearfix. And this clearfix, I tend to always place the clearfix as the very last element in my CSS, my very last style in the CSS, I should say. And this is a rule that you'll probably copy and paste to your toolkit. And any project you're using any project you're using floats, you can just then paste your clearfix. So this is how we create our clearfix. Dot clearfix ::. Now modern browsers, for this pseudo that we're going to use, and we're going to use the after pseudo, modern browsers require that we used a double colon. Older browsers still use a single colon. So newer browsers, a single colon will work. Older browsers, a double colon won't work. So you're going to have to sort of figure out your progressive enhancement path that you're going to take here. So we're going to start using, and probably it's going to work to be as a standard as the older browsers go away. We just have our double colons here. So now let's introduce our curly brace, and we're going to start out with our content property. And inside our content property, inside the quote marks, we're going to add a period. Now, I often create a clearfix, and I don't include the period. I just have the two quotes. And technically, that's not correct. Something should be inside here. We're using the period because the period, it's small and it's not overly noticeable. But it will show up on the page now, and we don't want this to show up. But we have to have some kind of content for this clearfix to work. Okay, that's why we're using the content property and this period. Now later on, we'll talk more about the content property and how you can add type, images, and other media into your HTML elements using CSS. So it's possible to place content on your page that is not physically in the HTML structure outline. We simply can introduce content with our CSS, which is pretty cool. And we'll get into that with one of our later projects. So we're going to establish some content. We are going to set the height to 0. So we're going to force the content element, if you will, to have a 0 height. So it will be basically invisible. All right. So we're going to take that one step further, and we're going to set the visibility to hidden. All right. And then we have to set the display to block. So we have to do that, all right? Now, after all that work, we can get to what we need to have done, and that is we're going to clear our floats. And I'm just going to play it safe and clear both. Okay? So what's happening is we are going to apply the clearfix to any parent element which has floats inside, especially if that parent element has a height of auto, and we need the height to automatically adjust with the content that's inside, even if the content is floating. All right, so we're going to take our clearfix and we're going to find section 3. And not on the ID, my bad there. So after the class for section 3, we're going to type in clearfix. You don't have to have the colon after, just clearfix. Okay, so what's happening is this after is a pseudo that is basically going to take this information, all right, and it's going to take that information and go down to where this element ends, and it's going to apply this information. It's going to apply this property when this element ends, hence applying the clear, which will clear all of our floats, which will make them appear to play nice and go back and join the normal flow of the document. So let's see if that is the case here. So we're going to save, and this is what we had without a clearfix and our floats with the height set to auto for our section 3. So let's go ahead and update our page, scroll down, and you will see that everything is coming back into play here correctly. So we could continue to add float elements, and our parent element will continue to add to its height as if these float elements are relatively positioned. Now, with that said, you can imagine if all of these were basic block level elements, they're in the flow of the document, and each of these boxes you had to deal with relative position and all that negative margin and figuring all that out. It'd be a nightmare. We could do this with absolute position, but you would have to still figure out your coordinate system. It's much, much easier to use floats, especially if you're trying to create columns and rows. So something like an image gallery, okay? Or even 2 column, 3 column, 4 columns of text in a layout. All right, so floats and clearing floats and using the clearfix.